How's it going tonight, kiddo? It's great to see you. I love telling you these stories, and I really hope you will enjoy this one. So go ahead, get cozy, relax, and feel free to close your eyes. Let your shoulders relax. Let the day settle where it belongs. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about a winter night. One that began quietly, like so many others. No one rushed into it thinking history was about to happen. It was just another evening in February. Cold outside, warm light inside. Families gathering close to their televisions, not expecting much more than a hockey game. But sometimes history doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it arrives softly, and only later do we realize how rare the moment truly was. This is one of those stories. It was February 22nd, 1980. The place was Lake Placid, a small mountain town nestled deep in the Adirondacks. Lake Placid wasn't built for crowds. It was quiet, modest, and used to long winters and early sunsets. Snow covered the ground in thick, undisturbed layers. The air was sharp and clean, the kind that stings your lungs just a little when you step outside. At night, the town grew especially still. Only the crunch of boots on snow or the hum of heaters breaking the silence. That year, Lake Placid was hosting the Winter Olympics. Athletes from around the world had come to compete on ice and snow, bringing life and energy to an otherwise sleepy town. Inside the Olympic arena, the stands were packed. People wore heavy coats and scarves, stamping their feet for warmth. Outside the arena, and far beyond it, millions more gathered around television sets, drawn in by something they couldn't quite explain yet. The year 1980 was not an easy one. The Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union had been ongoing for more than 3 decades. It wasn't a war fought with armies on battlefields, but with influence, ideology, and power. There were nuclear weapons pointed across oceans. There was mistrust on both sides. There were proxy wars, political tension, and constant reminders that the balance of the world felt fragile. In the United States, many people felt uncertain about the future. Inflation was high. Gas shortages had recently affected daily life. There was a lingering sense that the country was struggling to find its footing again. Sports, during times like that, often become more than games. They become moments where people gather together, quietly hoping for something good to happen. The Soviet Union entered the Lake Placid Games as the heavy favorite, having won 4 consecutive gold medals dating back to the 1964 Games. In the 4 Olympics following their 1960 bronze medal finish at Squaw Valley, Soviet teams had won 27 games, lost only once, and tied only once, and outscored their opponents 175-44. In head-to-head matchups against the United States, the cumulative score over that period was 28-7. The Soviet team had not lost a game in Olympic play since 1968. The Soviets were led by legendary players in world ice hockey, such as Boris Mikhailov, a top-line right winger and team captain, Vladislav Tretiak, the consensus best goaltender in the world at the time, the speedy and skilled Valery Kharlamov, and talented dynamic players such as defenseman Vyacheslav Fetisov and forwards Vladimir Krutov and Sergei Makarov. From that team, Tretiak, Kharlamov, Makarov, and Fetisov were eventually enshrined in the Hockey Hall of Fame. Many of the Soviet players had gained attention in the Summit Series 8 years before, and, in contrast to the American players, were de facto professionals with long histories of international play, employed by industrial firms or military organizations for the sole purpose of playing hockey on their organization's team. Western nations protested the Soviet Union's use of full-time athletes, as they were forced to use amateur, mainly college, players, due to the International Olympic Committee's amateur-only policy. The situation even led to Canadian withdrawal from the 1972 and 1976 Olympics. But the Olympic Committee did not change the rules until the late 1980s. The Soviet Union's hockey team was the crown jewel of international hockey. They weren't just champions, they were dominant. For decades, the Soviets had treated hockey as a national priority. Their players trained year-round. They practiced as a unit, moving the puck with precision, speed, and discipline. They skated differently than most teams. They passed differently. They played a flowing, collective style that overwhelmed opponents. They had won gold medals repeatedly. They had defeated professional teams from North America. Just weeks before the Olympics, they had beaten a group of NHL All-Stars by a wide margin. To most experts, they weren't just expected to win gold. They were expected to win easily. The American team was something entirely different. They were young, younger than any U.S. Olympic hockey team before them. Most were still college students. Many had never played together before this season. They didn't train year-round as professionals. They didn't have international fame. They didn't have expectations placed upon them. But they did have a coach, Herb Brooks. Brooks believed that speed, conditioning, and belief could narrow even the widest gaps. He selected players not just for talent, but for how they fit together. He pushed them relentlessly, physically and mentally. Many people criticized his methods. Some thought he was too demanding. Others thought the team simply didn't stand a chance. But Brooks believed something different. U.S. head coach Herb Brooks held tryouts in Colorado Springs in the summer of 1979. Of the 20 players who eventually made the final Olympic roster, Buzz Schneider was the only one returning from the 1976 Olympic team. 9 players had played under Brooks at the University of Minnesota, including Rob McClanahan, Mike Ramsey, and Phil Verchota, while 4 more were from Boston University: Dave Silk, Jack O'Callahan, goaltender Jim Craig, and team captain Mike Eruzione. As Boston University and Minnesota were perennial rivals in college hockey, for instance, they had faced off in a bitter NCAA national semifinal in 1976. Brooks' selection process was a 300-question psychological test that would give him insight on how every player would react under stress. Anyone who refused to take the test would automatically fail. Brooks had to select from 68 players who started the tryout. Brooks wanted to include in the team Joe Mullen, a future 3-time Stanley Cup winner and Hockey Hall of Fame inductee. But his father was ill, and Mullen signed a professional contract with the St. Louis Blues to support his family financially. The average age of the U.S. team was 21 years, making it the youngest team in U.S. history to play in the Olympics, in addition to being the youngest team in the 1980 Olympic tournament. But Brooks knew the limits of every player. As forward John Harrington said, he knew exactly where to quit. He'd push you right to the limit, where you were ready to say, "I've had it, I'm throwing it in," and then he'd back off. Brooks continued the organization by campaigning for the player's selection of Eruzione as the captain, and Craig had been the goalie for him in the 1979 World Championship tournament. Assistant coach Craig Patrick had played with Brooks on the 1967 U.S. national team. In exhibitions that year, Soviet club teams went 5-3-1 against NHL teams. And a year earlier, the Soviet national team had defeated a team of NHL All-Stars 2-1. In 1979-80, virtually all the top North American players were Canadians, although the number of U.S.-born professional players had been on the rise throughout the 1970s. The 1980 U.S. Olympic team featured several young players who were regarded as highly promising, and some had signed contracts to play in the NHL immediately after the tournament. In September 1979, before the Olympics, the American team started exhibition play. They played a total of 61 games in 5 months against teams from Europe and the United States. Through these games, Brooks instilled a European style of play in his team, emphasizing wide-open play with sufficient body contact. He believed it would be the only way for the Americans to compete with the Soviets. From the start of the exhibition matches, he conducted the team through skating wind sprints, consisting of N line to blue line and back, then N line to red line and back, then N line to far blue line and back, and finally N line all the way down and back. Some of the players took to calling these Herbies. On September 17th, the team played to a 3-3 tie in Norway. Believing the team wasn't putting up sufficient effort, an angry Brooks had them skate Herbies after the game. And, after a while, arena custodians turned the lights off, and the Herbies continued in the dark. Brooks skated the team for over an hour. The two teams played again the next night, with the U.S. winning handily 9-0. Near the end of the exhibition season, Brooks, because of subpar play, threatened to cut Eruzione, the captain, from the team and replace Craig with Steve Janicek as the starting goaltender, although he had supported them throughout. In their last exhibition game against the Soviets at Madison Square Garden on Saturday, February 9th, the Americans were crushed 10-3. Soviet head coach Viktor Tikhonov later said that this victory turned out to be a very big problem by causing the Soviets to underestimate the American team. The game was also costly for the Americans off ice, as defenseman Jack O'Callahan pulled a ligament in his knee. However, Brooks kept O'Callahan on the roster, which meant the U.S. was virtually playing with only 19 players throughout the tournament. O'Callahan eventually returned for the game against the Soviets, playing limited minutes. In Olympic group play, the Americans surprised many observers with their physical, cohesive play. In their first game, on February 12th, against favored Sweden, Team USA earned a dramatic 2-2 draw by scoring with 27 seconds left after pulling goalie Jim Craig for an extra attacker. Then came a stunning 7-3 victory over Czechoslovakia, who were a favorite for the silver medal. With its two toughest games in the group phase out of the way, the U.S. team reeled off 3 more wins, beating Norway 5-1, Romania 7-2, and West Germany 4-2 to go 4-0-1 and advance to the medal round from its group, along with Sweden. In the other group, the Soviets stormed through their opposition undefeated, often by grossly lopsided scores. They defeated Japan 16-0, the Netherlands 17-4, Poland 8-1, Finland 4-2, and Canada 6-4 to easily qualify for the next round, although both the Finns and the Canadians gave the Soviets tough games for 2 periods. In the end, the Soviet Union and Finland advanced from their group. Before facing the Soviet Union, the Americans had already surprised people. They had tied Sweden. They had beaten strong teams. They had played with discipline and energy. Still, few believed those performances meant anything when compared to what lay ahead. The Soviet game loomed like a mountain. Some viewers tuned in expecting a respectable loss. Others tuned in expecting a blowout. Very few tuned in expecting history. Before facing the Soviet Union, the Americans had already surprised people. They had tied Sweden. They had beaten strong teams. They had played with discipline and energy. Still, few believed those performances meant anything when compared to what lay ahead. The Soviet game loomed like a mountain. Some viewers tuned in expecting a respectable loss. Others tuned in expecting a blowout. Very few tuned in expecting history. With a capacity of 8,500, the arena was packed. Before the game, Brooks read his players a statement he had written out on a piece of paper, telling them that you were born to be a player. You were meant to be here. This moment is yours. Brooks believed they could win, and later said, "The Russians were ready to cut their own throats. But we had to get to the point to be ready to pick up the knife and hand it to them." So, the morning of the game, I called the team together and told them, "It's meant to be. This is your moment, and it's going to happen." It's kind of corny, and I could see them thinking, "Here goes Herb again." But I believed it. Brooks wanted his team to play short shifts, lasting 40 seconds or less, to stay energized by the third period. He instructed team physician George Nagobads to track ice time for the players, who later joked that he never saw the game since he was focused on his stopwatch. First period. As in several previous games, the U.S. team fell behind early. Vladimir Krutov deflected a slap shot by Alexei Kasatonov past U.S. goaltender Jim Craig at the 9:12 mark to give the Soviets a 1-0 lead. At the 14:03 mark, Buzz Schneider scored for the United States on a 50-foot shot from the left board to tie the game. The Soviets struck again when Sergei Makarov scored with 17:34 gone. With his team down 2-1, Craig improved his play, turning away many Soviet shots before the U.S. team had another shot on goal. In the waning seconds of the first period, Dave Christian fired a slap shot on Tretiak from 100 feet away. The Soviet goalie saved the shot, but misplayed the rebound, which bounced out some 20 feet in front of him. Mark Johnson sliced between the two defenders, found the loose puck, and fired it past a diving Tretiak to tie the score with 1 second left in the period. Confusion reigned immediately after, as the game clock showed 0 minutes, since it could not be stopped in time after Johnson's goal. Referee Carl Gustav Keisler ruled that 1 second would be put back on the clock, and the usual center ice face-off would take place before the first intermission could begin. A lengthy delay followed, as most of the Soviet team had already proceeded down the tunnel to their locker room. Eventually, 3 Soviet skaters, along with backup goaltender Mishkin, took the ice for the final face-off. The first period ended with the game tied 2-2. Second period. Tikhonov replaced Tretiak with backup goaltender Vladimir Mishkin immediately after Johnson's goal, a move that shocked players on both teams. Tikhonov later identified this as the turning point of the game and called it the biggest mistake of my career. Years later, when Johnson asked Vyacheslav Fetisov, now an NHL teammate, about the move, Fetisov responded with, "Coach crazy." Mishkin allowed no goals in the second period. The Soviets dominated play in the second period, outshooting the Americans 12-2, but scored only once, on a power play goal by Alexander Maltsev, 2:18 into play. After 2 periods, the Soviet Union led 3-2. Third period. Vladimir Krutov was sent to the penalty box at the 6:47 mark of the third period for high sticking. The Americans, who had managed only 2 shots on Mishkin in 27 minutes, had a power play and a rare offensive opportunity. Mishkin stopped a Mike Ramsey shot. Then, U.S. team captain Mike Eruzione fired a shot wide. Late in the power play, Dave Silk was advancing into the Soviet zone when Valery Vasiliev knocked him to the ice. The puck slid to Mark Johnson. Johnson fired off a shot that went under Mishkin and into the net at the 8:39 mark, as the power play was ending, tying the game at 3. Only a couple of shifts later, Mark Pavelich passed to Eruzione, who was left undefended in the high slot. Eruzione, who had just come onto the ice, fired a shot past Mishkin, who was screened by Vasily Pervukin. This goal gave Team USA a 4-3 lead, its first of the game, with exactly 10 minutes remaining to play. In what many Americans considered the longest 10 minutes of their lives, the Soviets, trailing for the first time in the game, attacked ferociously. Moments after Eruzione's goal, Maltsev fired a shot which ricocheted off the right goal post. As the minutes wound down, Brooks kept repeating to his players, "Play your game, play your game." Instead of going into a defensive crouch, the United States continued to play offense, even getting off a few more shots on goal. The Soviets began to shoot wildly, and Sergei Starikov admitted that we were panicking. As the clock ticked down below a minute, the Soviets got the puck back into the American zone, and Mikhailov passed to Vladimir Petrov, who shot wide. The Americans fully expected Tikhonov to pull the goalie in the waning seconds. To their surprise, Mishkin stayed in the game. Starikov later explained that we never did 6-on-5, not even in practice, because Tikhonov just didn't believe in it. Craig kicked away a Petrov slap shot with 33 seconds left. Kharlamov fired the puck back in as the clock ticked below 20 seconds. A wild scramble for the puck ensued, ending when Johnson found it and passed it to Ken Morrow. As the U.S. team tried to clear the zone, move the puck over the blue line, which they did with 7 seconds remaining, the crowd began to count down the seconds left. Sportscaster Al Michaels, who was calling the game on ABC, along with former Montreal Canadiens goaltender Ken Dryden, picked up on the countdown in his broadcast and delivered his famous call. 11 seconds. You've got 10 seconds. The countdown going on right now. Morrow, up to Silk. 5 seconds left in the game. Do you believe in miracles? Yes. As his team ran all over the ice in celebration, Herb Brooks sprinted back to the locker room and cried. In the locker room afterwards, players spontaneously broke into a chorus of "God Bless America." Players embraced on the ice. Crowds roared. Back home, people shouted, laughed, cried, and hugged without fully understanding why. The Americans had defeated the greatest hockey team in the world. But the story didn't end there. 2 days later, they would go on to defeat Finland and win the gold medal, completing one of the most remarkable runs in sports history. Over time, the game became known as the Miracle on Ice. It was replayed. It was analyzed. It was remembered. Some called it the greatest upset in sports history. Others called it a symbol of hope during a difficult time. But for those who lived through it, it was something quieter. It was the memory of a winter night, of watching together, of believing just for a moment that anything might be possible. That's enough for tonight. You can let that story rest now, like snow settling quietly on the ground. History doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and waits for us to listen. Get some rest. I'll be here when you're ready for another story.